guys, today is Michelle back with another YouTube video. Today we are going to be reacting to snarled videos. Okay. Let's see.
My name is Darren Sandbig. My oldest boy is 13 and my youngest is 11. And I'm a biology teacher.
Hey, my dark darlings. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to tell you about one of the titles and movie come with my adapt for the souls into its dim walls and even following you home. For years, a towering schoolhouse had ushered new students like Chris into its dimly lit brick halls. No matter where Chris went in the sprawling school, a classroom, the cafeteria, even the library, Chris heard chattering and whispers about her. Hushed gossip taunted and sniped at her from around every corner. Every mean word buzzed in her ears and repeated over and over in her head. This went on for weeks, until one day, Mrs. Abate, the school counselor, called Chris into her office. "You seem to be having trouble with your transition to our school," Mrs. Abate pointed out. As she listened, Chris noticed the counselor tugging at her high-collar blouse that almost hid a series of small pitted scars along her neck. "I'm not very well liked here," Chris admitted. "Everyone is always talking about me, whispering behind my back. As hard as it is, don't listen. Our school is a very special place," Mrs. Abate replied. "But you are more than what people say you are. Block the whispers out. Don't let them get under your skin." That night, Chris sat at home, scrolling through her phone. A post by a classmate, Ryan, caught her eye. It was about Chris, referring to her as a poor, know-it-all, ugly monster, saying Chris didn't belong at their school. Poor, know-it-all, ugly monster. For a stunned moment, Chris sat in the shame of those words. They hissed and lingered with her, just like the whispers she heard in school. Chris kept scrolling. Other students had commented, adding their own nasty words to the thread. The chorus of cruel buzzing grew with every new comment. Were they right? Was she somehow gross? A monster? Ow! Something bit the tip of Chris's thumb. She watched as an angry red welt swelled and rose. The heck was that? Chris looked around frantically for a bug. All at once, Chris felt sharp pricks along her arms. Something was biting her over and over. The buzzing roared. Chris clawed at the bumps appearing along her hands, on the back of her arms, desperate to stop the itch. Was it spiders, bed bugs? She couldn't find what they were, where they were coming from. Chris could only feel them, pinching, burrowing beneath her skin, spreading, misshaping her arms with grotesque red peaks. Chris scratched. Her scratching turned frenzied, skin tearing and bleeding beneath the tug of her nails. Catching sight of herself in the mirror, Chris stared at herself in horror. "I am a monster." She spun away from her deformed reflection, believing every horrible thing they had said. On her phone, the comments kept coming. The whispers buzzed on. The next day at school, Chris showed up in long sleeves. She'd woken up with her arms and legs covered in oozing sores. A few had even spread to her neck. Ashamed, Chris slumped to her desk. Around her, classmates shot glances her way, turning to one another to whisper. A giggle caught Chris's attention. Ryan, mouth scowling in disgust, was gesturing to Chris's rash-riddled neck. Chris tugged her shirt up, trying to hide her sores from view. She thought of Mrs. Abate's own high collar and remembered her words. Chris had let the whispers upset her, she realized. This school was a special place indeed. "But I am more than what people say about me," she reminded herself. Across the room, Ryan giggled again. The hum of the whispers grew. Chris's shoulders straightened. She stood up. "Speak up," she demanded over the growing buzz permeating the air. Ryan stopped giggling. "Excuse me? Speak up." Chris planted herself firmly. "If you were saying something kind, you wouldn't need to whisper." For a moment, the buzzing faltered. "Why do you need to hide your face behind a computer screen?" The class, ooh, looking at the two. Ryan paled as gossip started buzzing around her. Suddenly crying out, something bit her mouth. A red bump growing on her face, then another, spreading. the buzz growing stronger this time. Then all around Ryan, classmates turned to one another, exchanging whispers all about Ryan. Within the mania of the gossip, it didn't stop there. They also turned on one another, tearing into each other with words. And Chris could see what was happening to them, could see them scratching at bumps like hers. They began to peel and pop on their skin. They growled and snapped at each other, getting nastier and spitting insults like daggers. The buzzing swelled to a deafening cacophony. Ryan turned her eyes back on Chris. You're doing this. You're infecting us. No, Chris commanded over the clamor. We've infected ourselves. The Whispers don't care. They'll attack any of us. I'm not a monster, and neither are you. No one here is. The buzzing dipped. Softer now. We can't keep allowing other people's words to make us one. The last vengeful buzz died. Though the Whispers had died down for now, everyone noticed that a few pitted scars remained on their skin. They each had been marked by each other's words of cruelty and would carry those marks for years to come. They were a reminder that the Whispers would always be there, and that whispers can bite. Thank you to all of our patrons. While we do run a limited amount of ads, the show wouldn't be possible without your support. If you want to keep these videos coming, please visit patreon.com/snarled.
Okay,
Want more
scary.
Something Scary? You can hear more stories over on the
scary,
Something
but-
Scary podcast. Available for free on Apple Podcasts or wherever you
Let's
listen to your favorite
watch.
shows. The links are in the description
This is
below.
gonna be the
If
last
you'd like to submit a story, send me an
Did you know that the one-eyed Odin was alcoholic? Or that Loki gave...
Hey, my dark darlings. Before we get in today's episode, I wanted to tell you about one of our sponsors, without whom this entire show holiday gift place of local gotten into a scuffle. Waitress in poured me another drink as he leaned on his crutch. Don't mind them for being so cagey. The Gator Man makes everyone nervous. He dropped the bottle and one of the waitresses came over to help. He apologized and offered me a drink on the house. Noticing that his bandages had bled through a bit, the bartender told me that he'd gotten into a scuffle with a rowdy patron the night before and ended up with a broken bottle to the ankle. Intrigued, I asked if the violent guest was a regular. The bartender shook his head no and patted the gun on his hip, indicating he was ready if they came back. The waitress jumped in. I was so afraid, she said. The bartender had the reputation of a local hero. The parents of one of the youngest victims had suggested I go talk to him. When they needed help, the bartender had led the search for their daughter, and with a group of townsfolk, found the remains of her bloody dress near a gator pit. He had also stepped in to pay for the funeral costs, even though it was an empty casket. Joe Ball is a good man, they all said. Later on, when the bar cleared out, the waitress slipped a note to me as I left. It read, "Go round back." I made my way along a hidden path and found an old wooden barn house. Stepping inside, I lit the lone light to dimly illuminate the darkness and covered my face. The light flickered and revealed the backwoods evil surrounding me that smelled of rot and the acrid must of swamp water. There was a man tied to a drain pipe. Muffled screaming came from his throat. Taking the gag off, he pleaded, "He has my sister." "Who?" I asked, ripping the rope off his hands. "Joe. It's Joe," he stammered, and I noticed the dried blood on his clothes. He must be the patron who tangled with Joe the previous night. The man explained that his sister had run off with Joe a few days earlier, and when he heard the description of the Gator Man's victims, he knew she was in trouble. He went to the bar to look for his sister when Joe took him out back and tied him up, ready to feed him to the gators. Suddenly, they heard the squeak of the old door. Joe had entered the barn with the waitress at his side. He had a gun to her head, keeping her captive. "Show them," he told her as she tossed a frozen limb into the pit. Two gators jumped up to fight for the arm, quickly shredding it to pieces. They were hungry.
Ew.
"Don't hurt her," I said, realizing Joe Ball had charmed and misled the whole town. Stepping into the light, we saw him for who he truly was. Joe Ball, the Gator Man. "She's mine, and your dinner," he said, menacingly nudging us forward. As we got closer to the pit's edge, the waitress pulled a glass shard from her dress and dropped quickly, knocking Joe over. She slashed the back of his knees, which sent the gun flying, and Joe fell forward. Grabbing the gun, I pointed it at Joe, letting him know he was under arrest. Joe sneered, "You'll never take me alive." He let himself fall into the gator pit, each one of his pets ripping into his body, and he laughed as he choked on his own blood. Before leaving with her brother, the waitress thanked me, even though it was her courage that saved us all. Sometimes all it takes is even the littlest spark of light to fight the monsters in the dark.
That's disgusting. Why was he laughing when he was dying?
This December, life has been quite chaotic. From hosting shows to buying holiday gifts.
Nope, go away. Okay guys, remember to subscribe, like, comment down below, hit that notification bell, and yeah guys, I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.